Harry Potter and Gandalf the White. Chapter 8. The Great Battle of Our Time. Part 1. Harry and Gandalf stood by the window, watching the chaos unfolding on the grounds beneath them. Just then, the air was pierced with a blood-curdling scream. They turned to look for the source, only to see swarms of Dementors in the sky above the Forbidden Forest, gliding towards the school, their cloaks billowing ominously as they sucked warmth and hope from the air, causing students and staff to flee in terror. It is time for the return of the Nine, thundered Gandalf beside him, raising his arms in summoning motion. A bone-chilling screech filled the air, announcing the arrival of 9 cloaked Dementor-like creatures with long black iron swords at their sides, appearing as if from thin air and forming a boundary line between the castle and the oncoming Dementors. Harry doubted they needed any weapon other than dread. Their presence brought an even deeper terror, a dread so potent, like the opposite of a Patronus, a nightmare made whole and visible. Harry felt the chill of the Dementors' retreat as the Nazgul's terror took hold. The Dementors, normally the embodiment of fear, recoiled from the Nazgul, their dark forms wavering. What on earth were these creatures? Thought a wide-eyed Harry, feeling a tremor run through his body even at this distance. The creatures drew their ancient notched swords, their blades darker than the surrounding night. With a chilling battle cry, they fell upon the Dementors, their movements heavy yet deadly. The foremost Dementor was beheaded with a swift cut, sending its head flying to the foot of the castle, where those teachers and students present witness for the first time what was under the Dementor's hood. Those defeated dissipated into dark mist and shadow, eventually being carried away with the wind. What are they, Professor? They are the original servants of terror, the forefathers of the Dementors, whom now they fall upon. The Dementors now resemble only pale imitation of the true power of the Nazgul. Harry watched, transfixed to the horror that unfolded beneath them upon the grounds. The once mighty Dementors were being cut down with frightening ease. Those that remained fled back towards the forest. Perhaps for the first time, they had experienced fear, and found they did not like its taste. The grounds of Hogwarts had truly become a battlefield as more enemies swarmed in from all directions. Gandalf, beside him, observed the work of his servants with a cold smile. "The Nazgul," he said quietly, with a grim satisfaction. "They are terror incarnate, a force that even the Dementors cannot withstand." Harry nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the spectacle below. The Nazgul's very presence seemed to sap the strength of their enemies. Even the dark wizards and creatures attacking the castle hesitated, their advance faltering under the sheer weight of the Ringwraith's malevolence. "We must aid them," Gandalf said, turning to Harry. "The battle is far from won, and may yet turn against us." With a flick of his staff, Gandalf conjured a protective barrier around the castle, reinforcing the wards that were already in place. Harry, steeling himself for the fight ahead, gripped his wand tightly, spinning in the direction of the door. "Hold a moment," said Gandalf firmly. "I have something for you." Harry turned to see Gandalf hold out his hand. In his palm sat a silver ring set with a dazzling red gem. "What is it, Professor?" "It is the Elven Ring of Fire, Neria, given to me by Círdan. Great power will it grant the wearer." He motioned for Harry to take it. Doing due, Harry felt a strong wave of heat wash over him. "Put it on," instructed Gandalf, "and feel its power." Harry did as told and felt a fiery strength ignite within him. A powerful blast of sparks shot out of his wand, leaving scorch marks and burning embers upon the wooden floor. Before Harry could ask any questions, Gandalf handed him another ring. "And this is a gift for Miss Granger. It is the Elven Ring. Nenya, she will know what to do with it." And without further explanation, Gandalf quickly grabbed his hat from the stand and ran to the door. "Come, there is no time for instructions. You must discover the ring's power for yourself." Harry followed swiftly behind. Together, they stepped out of the office and made their way down to the castle grounds. The Nazgul's presence had turned the tide of the battle for the moment, but the defenders of Hogwarts still needed reinforcements. On the way, Harry peered through a broken window and desperation filled his heart at what he saw. There were too many of them. Thousands of enemies streamed in from all sides. Great goblin-like creatures, trolls, giant spiders, wolves, all mustered around the barrier which Gandalf had conjured, halting their assault for the time being. He steadied his racing heart, remembering Dumbledore and Gandalf were yet among them, and as long as they had them, there was still hope. As Harry and Gandalf reached the castle grounds, they were met by Professor Dumbledore, the elven ring Villia upon his finger, flanked by the teachers of Hogwarts and members of the Order of the Phoenix. Dumbledore's eyes shone as if with a blue flame, and his presence alone seemed to bolster the defenders' spirits. "Albus," Gandalf greeted, inclining his head slightly. "The situation is dire, but not yet hopeless." "Indeed, Gandalf," Dumbledore replied, his voice calm but carrying a steely note. "The attack was sudden and seems to have been long in the making. The enemy has for now been pushed back. We must regroup in anticipation of the next assault, assuming they manage to breach the barrier. It will linger but for another brief moment," said Gandalf. As if on cue, as the defenders discussed a defense plan, Gandalf's protective barrier around the castle and grounds began to flicker and then shattered with a resounding crack, as if made from glass, filling the night sky with blinding sparks like an almighty firework. The enemy forces, sensing an opportunity, surged forward with renewed ferocity. Just then, Gandalf slammed his staff upon the ground, the impact resonating like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. In a voice that carried for miles, he bellowed, "You shall not pass!" To the amazement of Harry and the other defenders, the power in Gandalf's words halted the advancing enemy for a moment, confusion and uncertainty spreading through their ranks. Dumbledore took advantage of this brief respite. "Harry," he said, turning to face him, "your task is to evacuate the students. Get them to safety. There is no way out of the castle now, so you must take them into the Chamber of Secrets. Once all are gathered there, barricade the entrance, though those of age who wish to fight may do so." "What about me, Professor?" asked Harry, conscious that he was still a year away from being of age. "You, Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger are permitted to join the defense. Now go and be careful." "Yes, Professor," said Harry, his heart pounding. "Do not forget the power of Narya," Gandalf said quickly as Harry turned back to the castle. "It will aid you in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Harry took a deep breath and nodded, then sprinted back into the castle. The hallways were filled with the frightened faces of students, their eyes wide with fear. He quickly rallied the prefects and began organizing the evacuation. Outside, Dumbledore put his wand to his throat and addressed the school, his voice magically echoing throughout the castle. "All students, please make your way swiftly to the Great Hall. Our school is under attack." "Everyone, follow me," Harry shouted, trying to keep his voice steady and his eyes open for Ron and Hermione. As he moved through the castle, Harry caught glimpses of the battle outside through the windows. The Nazgul were holding back all manner of monstrous-looking creatures streaming in from the forest line. Their terror sufficient to keep all but the boldest from advancing. Those who dared challenge were cut down mercilessly or struck blind with terror as they experienced the Nazgul's black breath. Back at the main entrance, Dumbledore gave final orders. "Minerva, you must organize the teachers, order members, and students willing to fight in the defense. You will need to cover the towers and remaining entrances. Professor Gandalf and I will hold the main entrance while these specters," he said, pointing towards the Nazgul, "hold the forest line." "But Albus—" "There is no time, Minerva," said Dumbledore firmly. "Go now, before the horde is upon us." With a nod, she turned in the direction of the school and immediately began assigning positions to the other defenders. That left the two lone figures before the enormous main entrance of Hogwarts, the greatest wizards of their ages, holding the line against the monstrous hordes of Voldemort and Saruman. Their partnership in that hour was a thing to behold and would be remembered in the books of lore and legend. The wolves were the first to reach within striking distance, their eyes gleaming with feral hunger. With a swift motion, Gandalf raised his staff, and a brilliant white light erupted from its tip, blinding the advancing wolves and sending them into disarray. Dumbledore followed with a powerful incantation, sending bolts of blue energy streaking through the air, striking down the nearest attackers. "On your right, Gandalf!" Dumbledore shouted as a pack of wolves broke through the Nazgul's line, lunging at them with terrifying speed. Gandalf responded by drawing his sword, Glamdring, its blade shining with a cold silver light. In a swift arc, he swung the blade, cleaving through the closest wolves. The strikes of Gandalf's sword appeared uncommonly heavy, a single strike knocking back and killing half a dozen enemies at a time. Dumbledore, his wand a blur, cast spell after spell. Enormous fiery serpents coiled around the legs of the oncoming trolls, causing them to bellow in pain and stumble. With a flick of his wrist, he conjured a powerful gust of wind, scattering the goblins that tried to swarm around them. Each movement was graceful yet unbelievably powerful. So spectacular was the display of power and mastery of magic demonstrated by Dumbledore and Gandalf that many students, teachers, and Death Eaters alike had forgotten the battle and simply watched, mesmerized. However, despite their combined efforts, the onslaught from their enemies seemed endless and at times threatened to overwhelm their position and that of the Nazgul. Massive trolls, dragging enormous clubs across the once pristine grounds, now advanced towards the castle at speed, tearing through lines of assembled goblins. Gandalf stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fire, and raised his staff, jabbing it in their direction. From its tip emanated 1,000 phantom swords, butchering the trolls in an explosion of blood and flesh. "Is this all you can conjure, Saruman?" bellowed Gandalf in defiance. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream filled the air. Gandalf and Dumbledore turned to see a group of students attempting to come to their aid, being set upon by a swarm of nightmarish-looking spiders the size of large vehicles. The arachnids fired webbing, ensnaring the students and immobilizing them. The largest and foremost spider was inches from sinking its fangs into the head of a fallen student. Dumbledore's eyes flashed with fury. "None shall harm the students of Hogwarts while I yet live," he exploded, breaking his usual calm in an uncharacteristic anger none had borne witness to before. He pointed his wand at the largest spider, and with the force of a small bomb, sent it rocketing 1,000 feet into the air. It disappeared with a faint shriek, leaving the other spiders confused. With another wave of his wand, Dumbledore set the remaining spiders ablaze. The fire roared to life, engulfing each creature in an inferno. They bolted back in retreat, screeching in pain, setting all they touched ablaze as they fled. As the last spider disappeared into the darkness, a chilling shriek pierced the air from the far side of the castle. Gandalf and Dumbledore turned toward the sound, their expressions grave. "It's the cry of your Nazgul," shouted Dumbledore. "They are being overrun." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "We must not let the enemy break through the forest line," he shouted. "They cannot reach the castle." He raised his staff high, its light blazing against the night sky, and called out in a commanding voice, "Radagast!" From the depths of the forbidden forest, a sleigh pulled by dozens of powerful-looking rabbits burst forth, racing towards the castle. At the reins stood Radagast the Brown, his eyes sharp and alert. The sleigh came to a halt beside Gandalf, and Radagast leapt down with surprising agility for one of his age. "Gandalf," he said in a panic, "what do you need of me?" "Radagast, the forest line is in danger of breach. You must work with Hagrid and your creatures to hold it. Do not let any enemy pass." Radagast nodded grimly. "Hagrid and I will do what we can. But where is he?" "He comes now," said Dumbledore, pointing his wand in the direction of Hagrid's cabin from where a large shadow fast approached. "Sorry, Professor. Must have fallen asleep," said Hagrid tensely, holding his pink umbrella. "What the ruddy hell is going on?" "We're under attack. There is no time to explain. Aid Radagast and the Nazgul in holding the enemy back from the forest." "We'll hold them off, Professor. Don't you worry." "Wait a moment, Hagrid," called Gandalf. "You are too exposed without armor or weapon other than your fists, large though they may be." He tapped Hagrid's shoulder with the tip of his staff, causing a flash of blinding light, which once dissipated, revealed Hagrid in black obsidian armor, with an enormous two-handed black sword in hand. "This armor will provide some protection from the enemy. May it serve you well. Go now, hold the line." Hagrid looked at the sword in awe, then nodded. "Thank you, Professor. I'll make sure none of them get through." With Radagast beside him upon his sleigh, Hagrid rocketed toward the forest, his massive frame visible from afar. He cut through a dozen goblins with a single arc of his new blade. A large orc captain who managed to duck beneath his swing and slash his own blade with all his might at Hagrid's leg was foiled by Hagrid's new armor. The blade shattered upon impact, to the shock of the orc, who a moment later was cut clean in half by Hagrid's next swing, shattering his helmet with the force of the blow and cleaving him in half from head to groin. The others fell back in dismay at the effortless defeat of their captain. The creatures of the forest, sensing Radagast's arrival, began to gather around him. Centaurs, hippogriffs, and thestrals formed ranks, ready to defend their home. Gandalf and Dumbledore turned back to the castle, where the main entrance was under heavy assault once more. This was only the first wave of the assault, the weakest, designed only to gauge our defenses. "Now will come the true test," Gandalf said, his voice unwavering as he spotted from a distance Death Eaters joining the battle. "We must hold this position, no matter the cost." Dumbledore nodded. "For Hogwarts." "For Frodo," whispered Gandalf quietly to himself. The two great wizards returned to the fray, determined to up the ante, for neither had yet unveiled their full might. Gandalf yet held in reserve the ring, which alone was sufficient to guarantee them victory. He preferred to avoid unleashing its dark power unless no alternative remained. Dumbledore, on the other hand, yet held back his most destructive spells, those learned and developed in his time long ago with Grindelwald, when the dream had been the greater good. Dumbledore's wand flashed with rapid, precise spells, each one finding its mark and neutralizing threats with surgical efficiency. His rediscovered youth and the power of the Elven Ring enhanced his combat and dueling capability greatly. Suddenly, to their surprise, there came an unexpected pause in the onslaught of goblins, trolls, wolves, and lesser creatures. "Where are they going?" asked Dumbledore. "It is the deep breath before the plunge," said Gandalf. "Our enemy is altering his battle plan. Throwing fodder at the castle has not borne the fruit he had hoped." A deeply unsettling silence descended, filling the defenders with uncertainty as to their enemy's next move. Had the attackers given up, or would sudden assault resume without warning? Gandalf and Dumbledore stood alone before the grand entrance, peering out into the smoky blackness and across the charred grass. As the silence stretched on, Dumbledore's keen eyes narrowed. "There are shadows moving," he said quietly. Gandalf gripped his staff tightly and looked out. The One Ring allowed him to see far into the dark. Its magic heightened his senses and granted him a clarity beyond normal sight. "What can you see, Gandalf?" Gandalf scanned the darkness. "Dark wizards approach," he murmured. "Very many of them." "How many?" asked Dumbledore defiantly. Without another word, Gandalf raised his staff high above his head, as he had done long ago in the depths of Moria, summoning a blinding light. The front of Hogwarts blazed with a brilliant, pure light, banishing the darkness and revealing the terrifying sight before them. What they saw sent chills down their spines and those of the defenders of Hogwarts who had been gazing out of the towers and windows. The grounds of Hogwarts were surrounded by hundreds of thousands of troops. At the forefront stood hundreds of Death Eaters, their wands raised, ready to enter the assault. Behind them, A mass of monstrous creatures and dark forces stretched as far as the eye could see. How on earth did Voldemort and Saruman amass such an army? Thought Gandalf in alarm. The sheer size of the enemy's forces was unbelievable. A force that seemed insurmountable even for the combined powers of Hogwarts and its allies. "Gandalf," said Dumbledore, dismay evident in his voice, "we are vastly outnumbered. Even for our combined might, I fear our doom may be inevitable." "Nay, my good Albus, Hogwarts will not fall this day." Gandalf smiled back at him. He then turned back to address all within the castle in a carrying voice. "Prepare for battle." The defenders of Hogwarts, now fully aware of the odds they were facing, having witnessed with their own eyes the enemy's overwhelming numbers, steeled themselves for the battle ahead. Teachers, students, and members of the Order of the Phoenix stood side by side, their wands at the ready, determined looks upon their faces. Professor McGonagall could be seen hurriedly leading a group of students to reinforce gaps in the defense. "Hold your positions. Hogwarts needs you," she barked. Once again, Gandalf and Dumbledore took their places at the front of the castle's main entrance, their combined presence a beacon of hope for all those within. All bore witness to their headmaster in defense against the dark arts teacher, bravely fighting the horde of monsters outside to protect those within. The light from Gandalf's staff still illuminated the grounds, blinding the orcs and offering clear visibility for those firing spells from the towers and broken windows. "It is time to unleash the full power of Vilya, Albus," said Gandalf. Dumbledore glanced down at the sapphire ring upon his healed hand. He closed his eyes, focusing his entire being upon it. The ring felt like a living entity with a soul of its own upon his finger, welcoming its new master to invoke its power. In response, Dumbledore raised his hand, palm outstretched. Suddenly, the first wave of Death Eaters advanced without warning, firing jets of green light towards the defenders. Gandalf raised his staff again, but before he could act, a loud whoosh filled the air, like the sound of a dam bursting. Dumbledore had commanded the lake to rise up into a violent tsunami-like flood, which slammed into the Death Eaters, washing away many who had not been quick enough to get out of the way in time. The water then formed into a living moat between the attackers and defenders, rising up and swatting away any who now attempted to cross. Those attackers left on the wrong side of the moat were mercilessly dispatched by the Nazgul, who had been growing in terror and stature, drawing power from their master's ring, now so close at hand. Harry, meanwhile, led the underage students through the castle, guiding them towards the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets. Finally, he spotted Ron and Hermione racing down towards the Great Hall, helping to herd the younger students along. "Ron, Hermione," Harry called, relief flooding through him at the sight of his friends. "We need to get everyone to the Chamber of Secrets. Professor Dumbledore and Gandalf are holding off the enemy to buy us time." "But what happened? Why are we being attacked? Why are you glowing?" asked Ron, scrutinizing Harry as he came closer. "Glowing?" repeated Harry, looking down at himself, and sure enough, there was a faint red aura around him, like a thin flame enveloping him. "I don't know. It must be the ring Gandalf gave me. There's no time to explain." He spoke as quickly as he could. Time was of the essence. "Professor Dumbledore and Gandalf are leading the defense. We're under attack from Voldemort and his armies. We need to get everyone into the Chamber of Secrets." "But what about the Horcruxes?" interrupted Hermione. "Surely you'll need those to defeat Voldemort." "Damn, I forgot about the Horcrux," responded Harry, clapping a hand to his forehead in frustration. "We'll worry about them once everyone's safe in the Chamber of Secrets." "Okay, let's go." The trio worked together, ushering students that had been gathered in the Great Hall up to the second-floor girls' bathroom and into the hidden passage. Harry paused and looked back at the castle grounds out of a broken window before he too entered the passage. The battle was frighteningly intense. The defenders were holding their ground, but clearly straining against the overwhelming numbers. Once everyone was safely in the chamber, beside the skeletal remains of the basilisk, Harry used Parseltongue to seal the entrance, assuring those inside that they'd be safe and promising to return for them once the fighting was over. "What now?" asked Ron, his face dirty and beaded with sweat. "We need to ask Dumbledore about the Horcruxes," replied Harry. "But where is he?" "He's on the grounds with Gandalf, fighting the Death Eaters." "Let's go then," said Hermione, hurrying toward the door. "Wait, Hermione," called Harry, remembering something. "I have something for you, from Professor Gandalf. He said it would help." Harry held out the elven ring, Nenya accidentally revealing his own ring as he did so, which Ron immediately noticed. "Wow," said Ron, looking at both rings enviously. "Did he send one for me?" "No, Ron," replied Harry, thinking fast. "He didn't have time. I think he'll give you yours in person." Harry then turned back to Hermione, who had taken the ring. "I don't have time to explain, but it's a ring of power," he said quickly. "You'll understand when you put it on." As instructed, Hermione put on the ring, and to the boys' astonishment, the transformation was instant. A subtle yet unmistakable energy began to emanate from her, causing the hairs on the back of Harry and Ron's necks to stand on end. She immediately straightened up as though her self-doubt had been lifted, replaced by a calm confidence. "How do you feel?" asked Harry, grinning at the change. "Our quest stands upon the edge of a knife," she said in an ethereal, almost unrecognizable voice, catching both Harry and Ron by surprise. "Stray but a little, and it will fail to the ruin of all." Harry and Ron stood speechless. "I know what it is you saw," said a voice in Harry's head. It was Hermione. Without explanation, Harry intuitively knew she meant his dream. He realized he could also communicate telepathically with her. Then suddenly another voice came into their minds, Albus Dumbledore. "Harry, Hermione, you must go to my office and retrieve the vial holding the portion of Voldemort's soul extracted from you, Harry. There you will also find the sword of Gryffindor. Bring both to me, quickly." "Yes, Professor," Harry and Hermione replied in unison. At that moment, their telepathic communication was interrupted by a gentle, almost endearing voice reverberating throughout the castle and grounds. "You have all fought valiantly. I commend you," said the voice. The sound of fighting stopped. Defenders and attackers alike paused, lowering their arms as they listened, mesmerized by the power of the voice. None who heard could reject its pleas without great struggle. "My forces will withdraw until midnight, giving you time to collect your dead. I extend my hand to you all in a generous offer. Join me and live. Give me Harry Potter, and there will be no more death. You will all be free to leave the castle unharmed. Against my power, there can be no victory. All who refuse shall suffer an agonizing death. You have 1 hour to decide. Life or painful death." "It is the voice of Saruman," whispered Hermione.
Thanks for joining us on this adventure. If you enjoyed the journey and are eager for more wild fan fiction, don't forget to hit that like button, share with your fellow fans, and subscribe for more episodes. And if you're as enchanted by the idea of Middle-earth meeting Hogwarts as we are, make sure to check out our series exploring this magical crossover. Your support brings these worlds to life. Until next time, keep the fantasy alive.